Welcome to another captivating episode of Raw Momversations,
where fearless moms and experts unite to explore alternative practices. Hey there, I'm Allie.
And I'm Melania. Our mission is to empower your one-of-a-kind parenting journey. Join us as we explore unconventional birthing and parenting methods.
Get ready for inspiration, authentic stories, and unwavering family love.
Together, we're rewriting our rules of parenting one bold step at a time.
So without further ado, let's kick off this empowering momversation.
Raw Momversations, where fearless motherhood leads the way. We have Miranda, known as the Informed Birth on Instagram, as our guest today, a guide for a woman's birth experience. Miranda's mission is to make your birth experience magical and euphoric, a memory to cherish forever. As a doula, she's dedicated to supporting you through your birth plan, helping you navigate important decisions and advocating for your choices. Miranda's approach is all about empowering you to know all your options, trust your body, and walk into birth feeling confident and at peace. With her by your side, you'll be reminded of your strength, guided through every breath, and supported every step of the way. Welcome, Miranda.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
So, Miranda, it's fascinating to learn that your pregnancy journey is actually what led you down the path of becoming a doula, right?
Yes, that's right.
So, can you tell us a little bit about that?
For sure. So when I was pregnant with my first, and this was 5 years ago, I, for some reason, just felt in my heart really called to having an unmedicated natural birth. And at the time, didn't feel like there were tons of resources to help me along in that journey. I was kind of isolated in terms of location of where I lived and didn't feel like there were a lot of people or resources. Instagram wasn't as blown up in terms of what you would see today for information, and really felt like I was navigating it by myself because everyone I knew, my friends, my family, all had, epidural births or medicated births, which is totally fine. But I felt isolated in that I didn't know how to go about it myself. So I ended up having the birth that I wanted. I was really excited and felt on like a high horse for the birth that I had and the experience I was able to give myself and my baby, and kind of really felt called to doula work at that time because I was like, everyone should have this birth experience. It's so wonderful. And I feel like if you just knew, like, people are missing out on this really great experience. And when I got pregnant with my second, I chose to get induced because we were having some fundal height measurement issues, thinking that the baby was too small and my placenta wasn't working properly. And it was at that time that was kind of a humble experience to say to myself that while it's great to have, a problem-free, unmedicated natural birth, that's not the reality for every mom. And I really changed my perspective to thinking that you can have whatever birth you want, but I think you should be informed and make decisions that you feel really empowered for yourself, for your baby, your pregnancy, your birth, and not be kind of cornered into something that you may not want to be doing. Because I think that happens a lot, that moms end up something happening to them during birth and they leave walking away from the experience saying, I wish I would have known, or nobody told me, or if I just would have done this differently. And I really want to try to rewrite that narrative before going into birth so you can have a really empowered experience that you feel good about walking out of it no matter what happens. So I took that information and that those birth experiences for myself and really felt that it was pulling on my heart to get into doula work, to be an advocate for other moms and kind of teach them what I knew so that they weren't feeling like they were starting from ground zero like I had.
And just out of curiosity, your first pregnancy where you decided that you had that calling, had you been inspired by anybody? Did you know anybody else who had taken down that path, or that was really something that just spoke to you?
Yeah, I know. It's so interesting. It's just something that spoke to me. As soon as I found out I was pregnant, it just was something that, like you had said, it just tugged on my heart. It was on my brain. It wasn't a question. Like, I knew that I was going to get books and I was going to find a provider who could help me along in that journey. And there wasn't really another option. My mind was set and I just felt called to it and kind of tried to really see it through. It was interesting because, I don't know, I think like as a mom, you sometimes just have intuitions that you don't have explanation for. And that's really what I felt.
Wow. It's actually my doula who opened up the world of like natural birth and just understanding going into a hospital, what can happen, we always talk about this, like she put Post-its on me this is where you'll have the IV, this is where you'll have the epidural, they're going to put a catheter, they're going to do this. And I'm sitting there looking like, oh my God, I don't want any of this. Like, how can I had no idea. And I think that's the importance of a birth plan. Is it's not just, I don't want an epidural, I don't want Pitocin. It's also kind of understanding what each of those are, right? So you're not just checking boxes, but you're learning like a whole new world.
Were all of your labors in a hospital?
Yes, all 3 of them were, but my 4th were planning a home birth.
Okay, I was going to ask you, do you want to talk to us a little bit as a doula, how you're preparing for your 4th birth?
Yeah, I think it's funny. With subsequent pregnancies, like everyone, you kind of become more, I don't want to say distant because that doesn't feel the right word. Like with my first pregnancy, I could have told you how far along I was, what size the baby was. I could have told you exactly when my next appointment was. And now I forget. I like look at my week information like the day before I'm supposed to be going into the next week because you just kind of forget. And I think it's like almost a blessing in disguise that you aren't so
obsessed
worried,
and
if you will.
worried.
Yeah, for sure. So I've really just kind of been trying to enjoy this pregnancy as much as possible. I don't know how many kids we're going to have, but I really want to enjoy each one as its own. But trying to also just let it be what it is. I feel jealous. I have friends who are pregnant because they're getting ultrasounds and they see the pictures of the baby and they know what the sex is. And I'm kind of like, oh, we have an appointment in a month and we'll hear the heartbeat and it'll be very low key. But that's how I feel it's meant for me right now. So my approach is just very low key, and very hands off, if you will. I just want birth to unfold as it's supposed to. And with your 4th baby, even with my 3rd, you realize there's just really not that much preparation in terms of things you need to get that you need. I mean, as long as we have a few clothes and my boobs are producing milk, like I feel set, so it's just very hands off in that respect.
And I'm assuming there are birthing centers or in Atlanta, but you've chosen a home birth, right?
Yes, there is one birthing center, but I decided that home birth would be a better route for me, just because too, I wanted to involve my children and, give them experiences to welcoming their brother or sister into the world and show them also like what birth looks like, from this perspective of physiological birth, especially for my daughter. So that's why partly too, I wanted to birth at home.
That's beautiful.
How old are your children?
My oldest is 5. He's a boy. And then my daughter is 3. She'll have turned 4 when this baby is due. And then my youngest is 1.5.
You have your hands full.
Yes, I do. And I'm reminded of it often.
You're reminded of that often?
Yeah, every time we step out, someone, says,
has to say something.
Reminds us, oh, your hands are full. I'm like, I know.
Well, for those who can't visually see right now, Allie's holding on to her little one, multitasking.
Nap right now. So let's talk about birth plan. And given the unpredictable nature of labor, some may wonder what the significance of having a birth plan would be.
That's a good question because I get that a lot. I feel like there is sometimes like an ignorance is bliss approach to birth planning because there is this fear of the unknown, especially when you haven't done it before. There's so many nuances that could happen or could go sideways from what you are expecting. And so a lot of moms just don't want to look at a birth plan and kind of set them up for expectations that may not be met. But my argument to that is twofold. Number one, 9 times out of 10, births go to plan. I mean, there's this physiological process that our bodies and babies take part of that typically looks the same in all moms. So the lesser amount of interventions you're doing, the more likely it is to go to plan, if you will, because our bodies were made to birth and babies were made to be born. And then the second fold of that is that in the event something does go not according to plan, having a birth plan is about not just checking boxes, but having the information to make informed choices. So exactly. I think if you're going to be a mom who kind of downloads a free template, checks a bunch of boxes, and then, pats themselves on the back, that's not really the intention of birth planning. The point is to look into all the details, the pros, the cons, what the intervention is so that you feel good to make a choice no matter what happens. You know, your plan goes to plan, that's great. But if it doesn't go to plan, you'll feel good about making decisions in the process that you can walk away from birth feeling really empowered from.
It's so funny. You say ignorance is bliss. And I think that was my exact sentence I said in our first podcast that we did. It was called Fear of Birth. I didn't have a doula and I didn't have a birth plan. It was different times. We were both in the heat of COVID with our pregnancies. But yeah, probably not the route I would have liked to have gone down. There was an immense difference between you and I, and the knowledge and the confidence in making decisions.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely had a very detailed birth plan. I knew every single box I checked, what it meant, what my options were, what were the alternatives. And, you know, even if someone, like we were just talking about this, if someone says like, I do want an epidural and that's my birth plan, well, there is a huge chance that that epidural might not work. So what is your plan if that doesn't work, you know?
For sure. And there's a lot of moms who want to get an epidural, which is, again, totally fine, but they don't understand, well, if you get an epidural, do you know that you're going to be bedbound, which means that this might happen to your interference with, you know, there's all these cons, if you will, even side effects that moms don't realize. They just think, I'm going to get an epidural and my birth is going to be pain-free, it's going to be great. Which happens in a perfect world, but there's also a lot of ramifications that come from it that moms, again, walk away from birth saying like, gosh, I wish I would have known I was going to suffer with back pain for years from having this epidural. And so it's that kind of thing that, you know, if you know getting an epidural might cause back pain for years, you know that it might cause a stalled labor and you're okay with that, then by all means, but you should know that prior to having making the choice.
Absolutely. I think it's so important. Like education is the most powerful tool.
Yeah, which was basically the next question. How can expectant parents educate themselves to make an empowered choice during their birth decision, during their birth experience? Excuse me.
Yeah, I think what's a little bit difficult is although the world of Instagram is great in terms of information, there's also a lot of information that comes from polarizing parties. We have parties of accounts who think that you should have medicated births, which are great, or accounts who think you should have free births. And it's hard to find like the happy medium. Like, what if I just want to have informed choices when you know, during pregnancy and birth? And so finding books and resources, there's lots of, you know, well-renowned books out there for moms who like to read, or blogs of information, and finding a healthcare provider really who you know is going to support you in your journey and provide you with information, which I see more and more of, like healthcare providers who are more open to conversation. You know, I think we're hopefully like moving past the world of, you know, doctors who are living in a godlike complex to kind of just tell you what to do. I think if you can find a provider who's willing to have conversation and, you know, provide you information and provide you resources, that's very helpful. And surrounding yourself with women who have had like births in which you want to have is helpful. And also perhaps getting a doula who can help walk that journey with you, because you have continuous support from her throughout your pregnancy, and she can point you in resources that are what you're looking for, and also local resources that can help you with things that you need like within your area.
How can they collaborate their birthing preferences with their medical team?
Mm-hmm. I think first, like I had mentioned earlier, it's so important to pick your birthing team for whom you know is going to support your general birth plan, because it's important to be with someone who's aligned to your preferences. And then having conversation with them every time you go in. I know that you had mentioned appointments in Canada tend to be very quick and brief, which tends to be the case here too. And I wonder who that falls on. Is it the doctor for not scheduling more time, or is it the patient or the mom who's not coming in prepared with questions, you know? And so I think starting every appointment with your birth plan and starting the conversation with, this is what I'm wanting in my birth plan. Like, generally, I understand things can go differently, but can you talk to me how you can support that and what your initial thoughts are? I think having collaboration is important. Obviously, at the end of the day, your birth goes how you want it to go, and you have the ultimate power over how things go. But I think the collaboration is important, and I think that gets you a long way with working with your healthcare team. I think what's hard when moms go into their birth plans not having the information and they say, we want XYZ. And the doctor's like, okay, great. Can you tell me why? Or do you know that this might be a result of that? And the moms don't know any better. I think that that kind of can create tension in terms of us wanting something without really understanding why or what it might mean in the long run. So having those conversations, and every time you go into your appointment with, here's 3 things I want to talk about on my birth plan today. I want delayed cord clamping. I want skin to skin after. Can you talk to me about how you're going to support that, or what that might look like, or what might interfere with those things? Because I want to, kind of head off all of those things ahead of time. Having a topic of conversation every time you go in, I think, is so important.
I have a question. Did you have a unmedicated birth in a hospital?
Yes, I did. For my first and third, they were totally unmedicated. In my second, I had my induction done. And then after that, it was like unmedicated, natural, if you will, beyond the induction.
Did you find that the staff at the hospital was respecting your choices, or did you find them to be a little bit pushy or, time sensitive?
I think that's such a good point you bring up, because I think that generally speaking, I think that OBs get a really bad rap for that kind of stuff. Like they're pushy, or they want a timeline, or they want to schedule things that you don't want scheduled in terms of induction or C-sections. And I think in my experience, both with my pregnancies and who I go into the hospital with as a doula, I don't ever find that really to be the case. And I think because when I walk alongside moms in their birth journey, and when I go into my pregnancies, we are all informed. And so when we say, no, this is what we're getting and this is why, I think that there's a level of respect that the doctor kind of, I don't want to say like we need to like get their approval, but they appreciate that we know that this is going to be a hard labor because we're going unmedicated, and we accept it. We're going to do the work. Whereas I think when moms go in without having any education, or not having practice of, relaxation or meditation techniques in order to cope with pain, I think that that's when there can be a level of frustration in terms of tension between doctors and moms, because the doctor can see from the outside that this may not be going down a great path because the mom can't relax properly, or she's not making choices that she has the information beforehand for. And that can kind of lead to like a weird feeling of tension. But I think when you go in educated and go in having had those conversations like we talked about with your providers, I think that that kind of really alleviates a lot of that potential tension in the room, if you will.
Yeah, I feel just a lot of people, or a lot of moms, feel like they've been, kind of bullied into an induction or any other type of intervention. And they look back and they're like, oh, I wish I just knew more about that. Or I wish I knew what a balloon was. They just came in the room and said, a balloon's going to make your baby come faster, and then there she was, traumatized for the rest of her life.
See, it's funny for me, I didn't have a doula. I wasn't knowledgeable about anything involved in the birth process. So I had thought that by getting the epidural that I'd be able to be in the room and be more controlled. In that sense, I thought if I wasn't in pain that I would be able to make more effective decision making. But I feel like you said it yourself, when you're walking by the side of the woman that you're working with, I think it's just the most important thing is feeling supported and being around the people around you who are supporting.
Big time. I hope to be at your next birth.
She does. She wants to.
Yeah, she give you a doula.
If my husband.
I can't wait. My first birth was in a hospital. I had my birth plan, which we had to deviate from. I wanted a fully unmedicated, but I ended up having a sweep, which led down the cascade of interventions. They did respect most of my birth plan, which said no students in the room. I learned that from her Grey's Anatomy experience of 15 people,
oh no,
viewing party. So they did respect that, and you have to be open and flexible to a changing birth plan.
Yeah, like I had mentioned earlier, generally speaking, most of the time birth goes to plan. The less we interfere with it, the more that birth can be birth. But that is something that we talk about, and we talk about nuances that can come up, and we talk about how we're going to have conversation in the moment. And I like to have a lot of conversation with whoever else is going to be in the room. Sometimes mom is there, sometimes husband, or most of the time husband. And so we have conversation about when mom is really in the thick of labor and not really in a state in order to make good decisions or have conversation, or she's really vulnerable, how are we as a team going to advocate for her, and what is that going to look like? We have a lot of conversation about that too, because as you all know, once you get into the thick of labor, it can be really hard to like do the advocating for yourself. Like you're not in a place to say, well, tell me the pros and the cons and tell me these things. You kind of are just so vulnerable and so primal at that point that you have to rely on your team at that point, which is why it's so important to make sure everyone is on the same page, from your husband, your mom, your healthcare providers, so that you feel really calm and comfortable with who you're with.
I remember telling my husband, I'm like, if they come around with that epidural cart, you tell them to leave. I don't want them near me. And so I ended up being induced. And I didn't take that into consideration when I said no epidural. So I was induced, and then 2 hours later, I was just dying. And here came the cart with the epidural. And I was like, okay, I'll take it, you know. And my husband's like, but honey, you said you didn't want it. I was like, give it to me now. I did not think about the induction and how much pain that would cause me. I wasn't aware of that, you know?
Mm-hmm. But can we elaborate on the importance of having these birth plan discussions and involving your partner throughout the whole process?
Yeah, I think that's so important. I, in fact, like require, for lack of a more polite term, that husbands or whomever is going to be part of the birth team are attending appointments with mom with me, so that we can be on the same page, because it is really difficult to be the mom who's laboring and be in this vulnerable state and not have everyone on the same page. You need people who are going to be respectful of what you want, and people who are going to be able to help you determine, like, well, you said you didn't want the epidural, but now you're saying it, so I don't know what that means. And it's also good to have conversation with, you know, dads or moms or whomever is going to be in the room, because it is such an intense, interesting experience in which, unless you've had babies before, you'll never see your like wife or friend go through this level of intensity or this level of vulnerability before. And so it's good to have those conversations too, to say, I understand. I think that there's a level in which we kind of like disregard, you know, dad in the room. And I know that there's like this funny, like, dad shouldn't make fun of the bed they have to sleep in, which, you know, probably is not the most comfortable thing. But there is a level in which dad needs to have support too, and be feeling as though he's on the same page, because everyone has to be supporting mom, especially when she's needing it. So, you know, having conversation and including dad or mom or whomever in your birth plan, and having conversation on what you want that to look like, how you want them to participate in your labor journey, you know, in an ideal world, and how you want them to advocate for you, is all really important, that everyone's on the same page, because it makes like a really cohesive environment, which is really important.
How was your husband during the birth, Melania?
I mean, he was great. The thing is, I had an epidural, so I was able to sleep for a couple of hours. So I think he was great. It was more where he really stepped in is we unfortunately had to go to the NICU, and I was just so depleted, and my husband like really, really took charge in that sense, and just like communicating with the doctors and being like a really supportive husband in that situation.
I shall be your next birthing
You
partner.
will. She hopes to catch my baby.
With your husband. He'll be there too, obviously. But
one hand each.
I'll volunteer to catch the baby.
I love it.
But let's just talk a little bit about the services that you, in general, yourself provide for your clients.
So I provide 3 levels of service. I provide just prenatal appointments as a service, where we spend time prenatally talking about your birth preferences, how to have those conversations with your healthcare team, how to get your birth team at home on board, things you should be doing. And I walk with you along your pregnancy journey, and then kind of send you on your way, if you will, whenever you have your labor and birth, because I think so much of birth preparation is done beforehand, you know, walking through fears in which you may have, walking through any past trauma or past birth experiences you need to talk through, what went well, what didn't go well. And I think that the mental preparation is half of the work, really. And so that's one of my services. And then I also offer an in-person service where we do all of that. Plus, I attend your birth and I'm there with you through postpartum and help you with emotional and physical support throughout labor and delivery. And then we do a postpartum follow-up visit where I check in on you and see how things are going. And I also offer virtual services where we do all of that I just mentioned, but virtually for moms who are not local to me in Atlanta, who still want support, or moms who want support and want like a phone a friend, if you will, but don't necessarily want an extra body in the room too.
We believe that doulas should be on everyone's baby registry.
Yeah.
Like, that is the best gift that you can give to another mom. It's so important, the work that you guys do and the education that you provide. I mean, it's like vital to having the birth of your dreams, truthfully.
I have like my free birth plan template. And then something else that I have, which I think is very cool, is my birth plan blueprint, which takes all of the things you see on a birth plan template and dives into the summaries, pros and cons and alternatives of all of those things so that you feel like you're making informed decisions on what's on your birth plan with the information in front of you. You're not just saying yes or no, checking a box on your birth plan, but you have the resources and you have the information to quickly pull up on your phone, or for your husband to pull up during birth. Should someone say to you, well, we really need to do this, or here's what we're thinking, you have the information at hand and you don't feel like you're making up a decision without knowing what you're talking about firsthand.
So important. And where can they find this information?
It's all on my website, or you can find it through my Instagram too.
What's your Instagram handle? So everyone listening can quickly write it down and search on their phone.
I love it. It's at the Informed Birth. I think the other thing I would add is, like, in terms of birth planning, I think that we think that we need to kind of go into birth and pregnancy, having our birth plan and kind of starting the conversation during labor and delivery. But I think what's important to note is that, like, so much of, you had mentioned it earlier, so much of interventions and so much of our birth plans going awry or askew is prenatally. When we are at our third trimester appointments and we are told we should get a growth scan, or we're told we should get induced because baby's looking big, or we're told that whatever it might be. I think that a lot of our plan not going to plan starts prenatally at an appointment, actually. And I think that's important to kind of note, to like be an advocate throughout pregnancy and not just when you show up in labor.
That's what I always say. Instead of looking at what fruit my baby was, I was always learning the benefits of cord clamping, things like that. I was educating myself. Everyone has all the time in the world to see what fruit is, but they kind of forget about even what's to come after. Right? You delivered, and now what? Right?
Mm-hmm.
What do we do now with this little chicken?
What's funny though today is that we have a system in place. We have our questions. We have what we want to do. Everything works, and we're doing a birth plan. And then today, for some reason, everything fell apart.
It's so funny.
And yet we still birthed a beautiful podcast. Right? Of all themes that we did, the birth plan.
It's true. We never had technical difficulties until today.
Yeah.
We ask is there anything other major? We can get into our little questions. We like to ask what your favorite baby product is and what your favorite mom product is.
I think my favorite mom product is a good postnatal vitamin. I like to use Everyday Health just because I think that mom nutrition is so overlooked. So whenever you are postpartum, and especially I remember with my first being so, just like having no knowledge of what I was doing. I mean, I did all of the work for my birth plan and for my labor, and no work for what it meant to be given a newborn and to go home. And I was surviving on things I could eat with one hand and very little sleep. And I think that we're so depleted, and the village is so non-existent anymore, that having, an ability to take a postnatal vitamin so that you can get a little bit of your nutrients back into your system is super helpful. And so I recommend that to all moms, because you're so depleted from pregnancy and childbirth that you could eat like a phenomenal diet, and most of us aren't after birth, and you would still be missing out on things that you need for milk supply in your body and your brain. So I think that's my number one for moms, for sure.
That's a great example.
We were actually just talking about my milk supply dropping right now. And I'm like, I don't know what's happening. And now I'm thinking about it. Like there are days that go by where I eat like one meal a day. And I just feel like
You're probably so depleted.
I'm probably so depleted hearing you say that now. I'm going to go buy some extra vitamins. And what would be your favorite baby product?
Gosh, I know this is this is actually so hard for me because I'm not like a big baby product person. I think honestly, probably just a good baby wearing wrap. Especially your first, because a baby wants to be on you all the time and you need your hands to make food and to do whatever you need to be doing. But especially other babies too, if you already have kids, in order to play with your other kids or be able to make dinner or just to have that closeness without being tied down to sitting on the couch. I remember with my first baby, he wanted to be held all the time, which was so sweet. And now looking back on it, I miss those days so much. But during the time, I was like, I don't know if I can watch another Friends episode. Like, I just remember being on repeat all day. And I just felt like I couldn't move because I didn't have any way to hold him and get things done. So, like I said, I was eating like whatever I could open with one hand while holding him in the other. So definitely a baby carrier, because it's helpful for you from a productivity standpoint, but also for baby to be close to you and feel that love and that bonding from you while you're still able to be a little mobile.
Yeah, this one loves to be in my arms too. I've pretty much done 10 seasons of The Blacklist. That's what I've done for the past 3 months with her in my arms.
Yeah.
So Miranda, thank you so much for being on with us today. We apologize for all the technical difficulties that hopefully our users will not realize because we're just so swift with our editing. But guys, if you're interested in Miranda's birth plan and her blueprint, to me that's so interesting and I wish I had that, or any of her virtual doula services, because our listeners are from everywhere, you can reach out to Miranda on her website, on her Instagram, which we'll link all of that information in our show notes. And hopefully you guys learned something today. So thank you, Miranda, for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was so nice talking to you all.
This was a nice, real, and raw conversation.
See you next time.
See you next time.
See ya.